Okay, I want to welcome everybody tonight as we continue our study through the book of Genesis. Tonight we will be in chapter 27, and there's more than 40 verses, so we're going to pray, and then we'll jump in and get started. So, Father, we thank you for your goodness. We thank you for your presence. We thank you for your word. And Lord, I pray that you would help our time this evening to be fruitful, that you would give us understanding, that you would open our minds and our hearts, help us to be refreshed as we look through your word, help us to find principles and truths that we can apply to our lives today. And we give you praise for that in Jesus' name. Amen. So last week we went through chapter number 26, and by way of brief summary, chapter 26 was dealing with really the sole chapter that highlights Isaac as the main character, which is surprising because he actually lives to be 180 years old, which is actually 5 years older than his father Abraham. But only one chapter is given in which he is the main character or actor in that chapter. So we've seen in that particular chapter, it's actually not a positive highlighting of his life so much, because we've seen that he made the same decision that his father had made in lying about his relationship with Rebekah. And it was actually a story dealing with presumably the same king who was king over the Philistines there. And so you have kind of a repeating of the same type of story that we've seen with Abraham. And then we've seen in the latter part of that chapter where it tells us after the death of Abraham that the people group of Gerar went and filled the wells which Abraham had dug. Isaac had to keep redigging the wells. There was contention and strife with the inhabitants there at Gerar. And eventually, Abimelech, the king, seeing that Isaac was blessed of the Lord and was prospering, and finally he agrees and goes to him to make a peace treaty. And then we have two verses at the end of chapter 26 that are seemingly out of place. Really, chapter 26 is almost out of place because you have chapter 25, which is dealing with the birthright story there at the end of the chapter. Then you have this insertion of, this non-positive aspect of Isaac as a main character. And then you go into the story that we're going to see tonight, which is the struggle between Esau and Jacob for the blessing, which is kind of a wordplay because you have the birthright, which is the Hebrew word beracha or bechorah, and then you have in the story that we'll read tonight the conflict with the blessing, which is beracha, which is just the inversion of two letters there in the Hebrew language. So it's kind of a wordplay, so to speak, as well. But I want to look at verses 34 and 35 in chapter 26 that will move us into chapter 27. And let's go ahead and begin reading. And Esau was 40 years old when he took to wife Judith, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite, and Bashemat, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, which were a grief of mind unto Isaac and Rebekah. Now, how old would this make Isaac? Just a little pop quiz. When he married. How old was Isaac when Esau and Jacob were born? 60. So Isaac would be minimally what age? 100. And who else have we seen that was married at the age of 40? Isaac, right? Isn't it kind of odd how you have the replaying of certain aspects of stories in the patriarchs and their sons? You have the story of Abraham lying about Sarah being his wife. You have Isaac repeating that same story with the same people. Then you have Isaac marrying at age 40. And then you have Esau marrying at age 40. You have a lot of parallels throughout these patriarchal stories. So that would place, if we were looking at this chronologically, that would place Isaac at the age of 100. And we seen last week my blunder of overlooking an important point where it says that the filling of the wells took place after Abraham was dead, which would have actually been some time into the life of Isaac, Rebekah, and even their children would have been alive, because Abraham lived how long into the lives of Jacob and Esau? Anybody know? 15 years. So Jacob and Esau would have minimally been 15 years when you have that episode of the inhabitants of Gerar filling the wells that Abraham had dug, because it specifically says that they did that after his death. Right? So Jacob and Esau would have been at least 15 years old, which helps us more precisely date the timing of that story, which I had overlooked, which shows you that how important it is to look at every detail that's given in the narrative and to use the age descriptions that are given to kind of time frame everything. But we don't know exactly in chapter 27, as we begin reading, we don't exactly know how old Isaac is when the story takes place. But we do know that he's not near the time of death like this story would kind of insinuate. But let's go ahead and jump into chapter 27 and verse 1. And it came to pass that when Isaac was old and his eyes were dim so that he could not see, he called Esau, his eldest son, and said unto him, My son. And he said unto him, Behold, here I am. And he said, Behold now, I am old. I know not the day of my death. Now therefore take, I pray thee, your weapons and your quiver and your bow, and go out to the field and take me some venison, and make me savory meat, or a tasty meal, such as I love, and bring to me that I may eat, and that my soul may bless you before I die. Now what's odd about this is we know that he's minimally 100, but reading further into the Genesis story, we know that Isaac lives to be 180. So he's far from being on his deathbed. So you have to wonder if perhaps he was dealing with a sickness that caused him to at least believe that possibly he was going to die. But another thing that stands out in what we've read so far is that he only calls one of his sons to be blessed. If he was on his deathbed, naturally, historically, culturally, he would have called all of his sons to himself, and he would have blessed them all, or at least included them all in the blessing that would take place. Now, what would explain the fact that he called Esau? Is there anything that we've read so far that would explain why he called Esau? You remember what we read in chapter 25? That Esau favored, or Esau was favored by Isaac, and Jacob was favored by Rebekah. Okay? And so this has evidently evolved and continued to grow over time. And what is startling about this is Isaac's desire to bless the one whom God himself declared the blessing was on the other son. Right? Remember the prophecy concerning Jacob and Esau? That the elder shall serve the younger, and the younger will be greater than the elder, which clearly is talking about Jacob. And we still see Esau favoring the oldest son, and insomuch that he's wanting to bless him, and this includes Jacob, the younger son. So I believe we have an evolving, growing divide in the family and the favoritism that is going on. And matter of fact, we'll see the flip side of the coin. We'll even see the favoritism that still exists with Rebekah in relation to Jacob. Okay? So he tells him to take his quiver and his bow, go out in the field, and basically make him a tasty meal and bring it to him so that his soul may bless him. Now, before he dies, verse 5, and Rebekah heard when Isaac spake to Esau his son. Notice the wording there. And Rebekah heard when Isaac spake to Esau his son. Wouldn't it be more appropriate to say their son, given that she's mentioned in this sentence? So let's read it. And Rebekah heard when Isaac spake to Esau his son. And Esau went to the field to hunt for venison or game and to bring it. Watch verse 6. And Rebekah spake unto Jacob her son. Not their son, her son. So we have his son and her son. Do you think that the family has been divided? Clearly. There was an internal struggle going on that the parents were actually participating in and advocating. So it says, Rebekah spake unto Jacob her son, saying, Behold, I heard your father speak unto Esau your brother, saying, Bring me venison, and make me savory meat, that I may eat and bless thee before the Lord before my death. Now again, we know that he is clearly not on his deathbed. Whatever has caused them to assume that or whatnot, we don't know. But watch what she says. She has a game plan here that is going to work in the best interest of her son in place of his son. Verse 8, she says, Now therefore, my son, obey my voice according to that which I command thee. Go now to the flock and fetch me from there 2 good kids of goats, 2 young goats, and I will make them savory meat for your father, such as he loves. Notice that she's willing to be the one to actually prepare the meal, which is worth pointing out because Jacob is quite capable of making savory meal himself, because after all, isn't that how he took advantage of Esau in his moment of hunger and stole away his birthright, so to speak? I mean, technically he didn't steal the birthright because he didn't make Esau agree to basically swapping a birthright for a bowl of soup. But nonetheless, he did present it at a time where his brother was vulnerable. And we know that chapter 25 ended off saying what? Esau despised his birthright because of it. In other words, he despised what had been done after he got a little food in his stomach, he realized, my goodness, I just sold the farm for a bowl of soup. And so he had animosity and disdain, undoubtedly, that would be projected towards his brother. But she's willing to make this meal, and she has a plan. And that is further mentioned here as we scroll to the top in verse 10. And you shall bring it to your father, that he may eat, and that he may bless you before his death. Now, verse 11 says, and Jacob said to Rebekah his mother, behold, Esau, my brother, is a hairy man, and I am a smooth man. My father, peradventure, will feel me, and I shall seem to him as a deceiver. The word deceiver here is the Hebrew word that means a mocker, someone who's trying to make a mockery out of him because he can't see well. And I shall bring a curse upon me and not a blessing. So, one thing is for certain that we can understand in reading this thus far is that they very much viewed what would be spoken out of the patriarch's mouth as something that would be a binding blessing upon whom or the recipient of that pronouncement. Do you see that? Because he's not fully on board with the proposal of Rebekah, because he's like, okay, my brother's hairy and I'm not, first of all. So what if I go to my father and he feels me and he sees that I'm not hairy like Esau, and he decides instead of blessing me because I tried to mock him, that he pronounces a curse over me. So he's kind of deliberating whether or not he wants to be involved with this. But watch the extreme that she goes to in verse 13. And his mother said unto him, upon me be thy curse. In other words, hypothetically, if that happens, my son, only obey my voice and go fetch me them being the kids, the goats that can be prepared. And so I believe reluctantly he goes. In verse 14 it says he went and fetched and brought them to his mother. And his mother made savory meat such as his father loved. Now she takes another measure to procure this blessing for her son. Verse 15, and Rebekah took raiment. I don't know why it says goodly raiment, because the Hebrew simply just says clothing, of her eldest son Esau, which were with her in the house, and put them upon Jacob, her younger son. And she put the skins of the kids of the goats upon his hands and upon the smooth of his neck. Now, let's be honest. This seems like what would be a pretty unsuccessful attempt to fool Isaac. I mean, who is not competent enough to feel their son, even if they are not seeing very well, and not be able to distinguish between the skin of an animal and the skin of a human, which has led some people to be like, this is a tale, this is a legendary tale, and this is not a real story. I'm not going to say that it's a legend or a tale, but it shows the vulnerability of Isaac in the situation, because under normal circumstances, even with an aging man, you would find this hard to pull off, to put animal skin on you, in so much that that would fool your father into believing that you was the hairy elder brother. It just seems pretty pathetic, honestly. But nonetheless, we'll see that it works. And it says that she put the skins of the kids of the goats upon his hands and upon the smooth of his neck. So the goats that were slaughtered served a double purpose. They provided hair for him and meat for the meal that she was preparing. So she's really, what is she doing here? she's helping God out, which is something that we've seen happen in the patriarchal stories. God makes a promise, and someone involved in the patriarchal narrative helps God carry out his promise, as if he's not able to do that because of the prophecy that was given to her concerning the two brothers who were struggling within and what was said. And she, right out of the gate, favored the younger one because he's the one who had the blessing pronounced on him before they were even born, the prophecy. And she's trying to help God out. She's trying to help make sure that what God spoke would come to pass. And in her mind, she can't see it coming to pass if the blessing is pronounced on Esau and not Jacob. So somehow she has convinced herself, I have to help God out. I have to make sure that Jacob is the one who receives the blessing pronounced over him. Okay, so he's equipped. He has the hair all over him. And verse 17 says, and she gave the savory meat and the bread which she had prepared into the hand of her son Jacob. I will say this, it's a lot easier to volunteer someone else to go and try to pull off something like this versus her being the one that has to go do it. Right? It's easier for her to say, yeah, this plan will work. You'll never know. Just go on in there, Jacob. Right? But verse 18, and he came unto his father and said, my father. And he said, here am I. Who art thou, my son? So right out of the gate, he says, who are you? Which brings a tension to this story because he's trying to fool his father. And I mean, naturally, a father is going to know the difference between the voice of one son and the other, right? So there's some automatic tension, some drama, some background music that's playing when you start reading this part of the story, right? And Jacob said unto his father, I am Esau, your firstborn. He's just doing what Mama said, right? I have done according as you told me. Arise, I pray thee, sit and eat of my venison, that your soul may bless me. So he's doing exactly what his mother asked him to do. You have this tension going on. And then verse 20, Isaac said unto his son, how is it that you have found it so quickly, my son? We got some added tension. In other words, Isaac saying, how did you go and hunt and kill, prepare, and bring it back so quickly? And you know Jacob's like, dang it, I knew it. I shouldn't have listened to my mom. You know he is just scared to death because he was scared from the start. You know, what if I go and he realizes I'm trying to fool him and he pronounces some horrible curse on me? So, he's in a pickle, nonetheless. He says, how have you found it so quickly, my son? And watch what Jacob does. I love it. And he said, because the Lord, he spiritualizes it, because the Lord, that God has brought it to me, right? It's amazing how people will, even today, will spiritualize something that they in the flesh want to do, right? Because the Lord has brought it to me. No, he didn't. Don't blame it on the Lord. Your mama told you to do it. Hopefully the mama ain't your Lord, right? So he has to explain it some way. And to try to appease his father or get away or disguise what he's doing, he's like, oh, the favor of the Lord has brought it unto me. The Lord has just brought it into my hands and made it so easy so that I could bring it to you and you could bless me. Right? Yeah. Notice the message? All about him getting the blessing. Right? And then he blames it on the Lord. Verse 21, Isaac said unto Jacob, unknowingly, come near, I pray thee, or please, that I may feel you, my son, whether you be my very son Esau or not. So the music's getting louder, right? The background music's building. It's climaxing. And you know Jacob is just shaking. He's just like, oh my God, what have I got myself into? So, verse 22, and Jacob went near unto Isaac his father, and he felt him, and said, the voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau. Notice what he does. He hears the voice, but he relies on his feelings. The voice is Jacob's, but he feels like Esau. And what happens when he relies upon his feelings? Verse 23. And he discerned him not. Why? Because you can never rely on your feelings to discern. And he did. And he was fooled. Even though he knew it was Jacob's voice. So he had to ignore certain evidence and accept certain evidence that was false. He dismissed true evidence, the voice of Jacob, and accepted false evidence based on feeling. And he was deceived. And he discerned him not, because his hands were hairy. He was deceived by goat hair being on his son. That's a pretty pathetic lack of discernment. Let's just be honest. I mean, I just think you could blindfold me and I could feel, and I would be able to discern the difference between a hairy human and goat hair. I'm pretty confident in that. But he relied upon his feelings, and he did not discern correctly. Because his hands were hairy, as his brother Esau's hands, so he blessed him. Verse 24. And he said, are you my very son Esau? And he said, I am. And he said, bring it near to me, and I will eat of my son's venison, that my soul may bless thee. And he brought it near to him, and he did eat. And he brought him wine, and he drank. And his father Isaac said unto him, come near now, and kiss me, my son. And he came near and kissed him, and he smelled the smell of his raiment, and blessed him, and said, see, the smell of my son is as the smell of a field which the Lord hath blessed. Therefore God give thee of the dew of heaven, and the fatness of the earth, and plenty of corn and wine. Watch what he prophesies here in verse 29. Let people serve thee, and nations bow down to thee. Be Lord over your brethren, and let your mother's sons bow down to thee. Cursed be every one that curseth thee, and blessed be he that blesseth thee. So we have a couple of options here. Isaac is either truly prophesying of the Lord over him, or he is simply praying what he intended to be the blessing pronounced over Esau in a way that was actually prior prophesied over Jacob. Because he's really borrowing a lot of the same terminology that was spoken over Jacob while they were struggling inside the womb of Rebekah. And he applies that in this prophecy. So you have those two options there. Either he truly was speaking prophetically of the Lord, or he is just speaking something that he had in mind to speak over Esau because he was the favorite, which would have been kind of a rebellious thing to do, because he is pronouncing the Abrahamic blessing that should be over the elect line, which was said to be Jacob. And if his intentions were to speak that blessing over Esau, it would show that he was going against God, if that's the attitude he took. I'm not set one way or the other on what he had in mind. I really don't want to read into what his motive was. But nonetheless, what he speaks is what was said over Jacob. Be Lord over your brethren. The elder shall serve the younger. And let your mother's sons bow down to thee. Showing his superiority. And then he continues at the latter part with the Abrahamic blessing. Cursed be everyone that curses you, and blessed be he that blesseth you. Now, as soon as he blesses him, watch what happens here in verse 30. And it came to pass, as soon as Isaac had made an end of blessing Jacob, and Jacob was scarce gone out from the presence of Isaac his father, that Esau his brother came in from hunting. Now, undoubtedly, the story that we've just read and the dialogue and the interaction between Jacob and Isaac would have taken probably a couple hours at least, because you have all of this interaction, you have the presenting of the meal, you have him drinking the wine, which begs the question, did the actual meal and the drinking of the wine take place before the continuation of some of the story, which would allow for it to be easier to see how he could be so easily deceived by something so far-fetched, animal skin being placed on him? Perhaps he ate the meal and drank a little too much wine. We don't know. It is possible, because in a Hebrew narrative, things are not necessarily in chronological order. Matter of fact, to just articulate this, let's back up. Because right here, let me highlight this. It says, so he blessed him, but obviously he doesn't bless him at this point. It just is highlighting the fact that he actually was blessed, but it doesn't give the timing of it. Okay, so it could be that you have the meal that was eaten and the wine that was drank before he actually goes on with the dialogue and actually pronounces the blessing. But it could be seen either way. And so I'm not going to say it was one way or the other. But nonetheless, after these events unfold, no sooner than Jacob kind of gets out of the way, gets his blessing, and gets on out of the house, right? That Esau comes in from actually hunting. Now, verse 31 says, and he also had made savory meat, which would have taken time for him to go out and go hunting, kill the animal, dress the animal, prepare the meal. And he brought it unto his father and said unto his father, let my father arise and eat of his son's venison, that your soul may bless me. So Esau, he's like, yes, got the game, got it prepared. Now I'm going to get my blessing. Verse 32. And Isaac his father said unto him, who are you? So Isaac's probably thinking, okay, what's going on here? And he said, I am your son, your firstborn, Esau. And Isaac trembled very exceedingly. This would have been very bothersome for more than one reason. He has pronounced a blessing that cannot be taken back. And undoubtedly, he realizes he has pronounced the blessing over the non-favored son. At least from his perspective. It's clear Isaac favored Esau. and it was his desire to bless Esau, which is why I believe it says it this way when he said that my soul may bless you, which I believe is indicative of him saying what his desire, what his heart's desire is, because soul and heart are interchangeable words. So I believe that it was Isaac's heart desire to bless Esau instead of Jacob, which is why Jacob's disincluded. And you see this language articulated here. So, and the fact that he's trembling. Why else would he be trembling? I mean, what's the big deal? You blessed your other son. What's so bad about that? You actually did what God said was going to happen to him anyway. You just confirmed what had already been prophesied about the younger son Jacob. So he trembled very exceedingly and said, "Who? Where is he that hath taken venison and brought it to me, and I've eaten of all before you came, and have blessed him? Yea, and he shall be blessed." So he is bothered because he knows, I can't take the blessing back. Whom I have spoken over is whom I have spoken over. And that's something that we don't understand in our culture. You ever ran across the New Testament phrase where Paul tells Timothy, lay hands suddenly on no man? Because something they understood culturally is the transferal of blessing. And this is something that I neglected earlier on in my ministry, and that's why I don't do a whole lot of laying on of hands, because you don't do it suddenly. In other words, you make people prove themselves that they are worthy of the prophecy that is prophesied over them. You don't just haphazardly speak prophetically over people's lives when you know that they're not going to walk in that. That's what Paul warns Timothy of. And he understood the binding effect of this prophecy. And so he's trembling and he's realizing, I knew it was Jacob's voice. I know this is Esau's voice. I have been tricked. But I have blessed, and what I have blessed, I cannot take back. And truly he would have been bothered. Why? Because Esau's his favorite son. And he wanted to bless Esau. So, verse 34. And when Esau heard the words of his father, he cried with a great and exceeding bitter cry. The word cried there means he screamed. With a great and exceeding bitter cry. And said unto his father, bless me, even me also my father. Man, you ever heard that before? I mean, talk about drama, right? Just start screaming because your father has blessed someone else other than yourself. Reckon he loved his brother as himself? You wonder why the prophecy was spoken over Jacob and not Esau? You wonder why things have played out the way they have? Because, I mean, think about it. Esau, yeah, the same guy who gave away the double inheritance portion for a bowl of soup. Talk about someone who is living by their feelings. And apparently he inherited some of that from his father, the one he kind of liked to hang out with, right? So you see generational things throughout these patriarchal narratives, good and bad. So he's distraught. In verse 35, he said, your brother came with subtlety and hath taken away your blessing. How did you know it was his brother? No one told you. He just remembered. I knew it was Jacob's voice. I knew it. but I didn't listen to the voice. I went by how I felt. Y'all getting it? Timeless truth, timeless applications, folks. Things haven't changed. People are people. Humans are humans. So, he says, your brother has come and taken away your blessing. And watch what he says, what Esau says. And he said, is not he rightly named Jacob? What does Jacob mean? Yaakov. One who seizes the heel. What happens when you seize someone's heel? We've seen it in the story of their birth. You're holding someone back. But it also carries the nuance or the meaning of betrayal. Isn't he not rightly named Jacob? And I'm going to highlight this. See the parallel here? This is the name Jacob, Yaakov, which is taken from the root word ekev, which means heel, because he is the one who seized the heel of Esau as they were being born or birthed. But watch what it says. Yaakov, notice the same root here. And in English it says, for he hath supplanted me these 2 times. But it uses the same root. V'akveni, which means he has betrayed me these 2 times. He has seized my heel. He has held me back. What are these 2 times? What is he referring to? The birthright, Bechorah, and the blessing, Beracha. And he goes on to say, he took away my birthright, and behold now, he hath taken away my blessing. Now, he does have more of a right to be upset over this situation than the prior one. Because, dude, you're the one who agreed to give your birthright away for a bowl of soup. You can't blame anyone for that one. Okay, this one, you were out hunting, and he slipped in the back door, and he fooled Daddy. And he stole the blessing. He did. There's no 2 ways about it. Now, I think that his mother is very much to blame, as well as Jacob, because she's the one who put him up to it. And undoubtedly, had she not, it never would have happened. Right? Jacob didn't hear Isaac give Esau the command to go get him some meat so he could bless him before he dies. Rebekah told him. Okay? So he said, now he hath taken away my blessing. And he said, hast thou not reserved a blessing for me? You gotta love it. Grown people acting like kids. What about me? What about me? Verse 37. And Isaac answered and said unto Esau, behold, I have made him your Lord, and all his brethren have I given to him for servants. And with corn and wine have I sustained him. And what shall I do now unto thee, my son? In other words, I pronounced all the blessing over him. What is there left to give you or to bless you with? And Esau said unto his father, have you not but one blessing, my father? Bless me, even me also, O my father. And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. Doesn't this sound like kind of a brat kid in Walmart, like demanding to get a toy too?
Yes.
Don't be an Esau today, though. Y'all get it? we never should demand it be all about us and us getting our blessing. That's an Esau attitude. When you read how the New Testament interprets this story and applies it, it is not a positive thing to be like Esau. If you look at what Paul says about this analogy. So he's throwing a little fit. In verse 39, and Isaac his father answered and said unto him, he concedes, behold, your dwelling shall be the fatness of the earth, and of the dew of heaven from above. And by your sword shall you live. Careful what you ask for. And you shall serve your brother. And it shall come to pass, when you shall have the dominion, which is really not the greatest translation, when you shall have the advantage or the opportunity, that you shall break his yoke from off your neck. Now this would be in relation to what will be somewhat of an ongoing conflict between Esau's descendants, which would be known as the inhabitants of Edom on the east side of the Jordan River, and Jacob's descendants, which we know will be the Israelites. When would this prophecy come to pass that Esau or the Edomites would break the yoke of serving the younger brother or his descendants? When would that actually become a reality? When the Babylonians come and destroy Jerusalem and the temple and exile the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, that is when the descendants of Jacob would lose the rule and the authority over the Edomites from that point forward. And that's what this is prophesying. Or that, at least that's the fulfillment of what's prophesied here. Verse 41, and Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing wherewith his father blessed him. And Esau said in his heart, the days of mourning for my father are at hand. Then will I slay my brother Jacob. Now we know, reading forward, that his father isn't going to die anytime soon, and I'll explain why here in just a moment. But he says, the days of mourning for my father are at hand. Then will I slay my brother Jacob. And these words of Esau, her elder son, were told to Rebekah. So at some point, he begins to voice what he said in his heart, what he purposed in his heart, that he would kill Jacob, or at least she overheard him somehow. And she sent and called Jacob, her younger son, and said unto him, behold, your brother Esau, as touching thee, does comfort himself, purposing to kill thee. So she lets Jacob know, hey, Esau is planning to kill you. Now, notice how she left out after the death of Isaac. Why would she leave that out? Because she wants him to act quickly to what she's about to request. So she's got a little bit of trickery in her. Verse 43, now therefore, my son, obey my voice. Haven't we heard that before? Right? Earlier in this story. Obey my voice and arise. Flee thou to Laban, my brother, to Haran. And tarry with him a few days until your brother's fury turn away. It's kind of ironic that she would say, just go live with my brother for a few days, because we'll find out later on that it ain't just a few days. And Isaac doesn't die anytime in the near future. But she says, tarry with him a few days until your brother's fury turns away, until your brother's anger turn away from thee, and he forget that which you have done to him. That's probably not going to happen anytime soon. Then I will send and fetch thee from there. Why should I be deprived also of you both in one day? Why would she make that statement like that? As if she could lose them both in one day. Because if he killed Jacob, then vengeance could be taken out on him from someone connected to this family, or he could be kind of exiled, kind of like Cain was, and become a wanderer because of what he had done, and she could lose him in that form. Now she turns to smooth-talking her hubby. And Rebekah said to Isaac, I am weary of my life. In other words, my life is disgusting because of the daughters of Heth. Why would she make that statement? Because Esau had married 2 Hittites, right? And so she uses that reality to manipulate and ultimately get her way. She said, if Jacob take a wife of the daughters of Heth, such as these, of the daughters of the land, what good shall my life do unto me? In other words, my life is just worthless. So she uses that for what we will investigate next week in basically talking Isaac into consenting to send Jacob to Laban, to her family, to seek a wife there. And that will be the excuse for him going away when in reality she's trying to preserve his life. She's, again, trying to help God out as if what God has prophesied over his life and what has been prophesied by the Father isn't good enough. So she acts in fear and uses that in a subtle form of manipulation. Now, some notes that I wrote down here that I want to point out is this. Isaac clearly isn't about to die. Matter of fact, he won't die until he is 180. And based on what we've seen, he is at least 100, but possibly not very much older than that. Jacob himself only lived 27 years after the death of Isaac, his father. Now, how old did Jacob live to be? 147. 147. So he only outlived Isaac, his father. Jacob only outlived Isaac, his father, by 27 years. So what that means is Isaac was alive to see the birth of all of his grandsons born to Jacob. That's pretty amazing because Genesis never tells us that. But simple math makes it the only option because numbers don't lie, right? So Isaac was actually alive to see the birth of all 12 sons that were born to Jacob. That is pretty fascinating that Genesis would never point that out. Not only that, he died in, if we are to take the ages of all the patriarchs literally, he died in the year 2228 after the creation of Adam, at least the creation story that we see where Adam becomes a human being. Which means he died just a year before the famine in Egypt that caused Jacob and his sons to end up in Egypt while Joseph was in power. Isaac lived until right before Jacob and his sons traveled to Egypt to live in Egypt during the famine. He just missed getting to be a part of that by a year before the famine actually hit. That's fascinating, I thought. Also, Abraham was alive for 15 years after the birth of Jacob and Esau. The Bible never tells us that either. So, I thought those were some fascinating points that are not mentioned in the Genesis account that are worth noting. Again, something that I haven't found a satisfactory answer for is the fact that last week what we went over in chapter 26 is the only story in Genesis that the promised seed of Abraham is the main character in the story. He's not even the main character really in this story. I would view that as being Jacob more so, because really the story is about the blessing that Jacob, ultimately receives and steals. So the fact that he lived to be 180, 5 years older than Abraham even, and so little is said about Isaac remains a mystery, or at least remains a mystery to me, and I haven't found any information that explains the lack of detail about his life. But nonetheless, we will see in the coming weeks that we will look at a lot of Jacob's life. And the story will continue in chapter number 28. But I want to give you an opportunity before we leave to ask any questions in relation to the content that we've covered. So if you have a question.
So was it just between Jacob and Esau that the birthright was sold to Jacob? His dad didn't know it, or anybody else?
Certainly it would have been known, because Esau despised his birthright, and I guarantee it, Jacob would have been like, guess what? Esau sold me the birthright.
Well, if Isaac knew it, and he knew that was Jacob's voice, but he went ahead and act like he knew it was Esau, and he blessed him anyway.
He was fooled, clearly. Isaac was clearly fooled in that he did not listen to the voice, and he went on the touch and assuming that it was Esau based on, the goat hair that was on Jacob.
So even though he got the blessing by deception, he was still blessed.
Yes. He was blessed before he came out of mama's womb.
So he really wouldn't have lost the blessing then, would he?
That's the whole point of the story, is that Rebekah didn't have to help God. Abraham didn't have to help God by having Hagar and going into Hagar and having Ishmael. And that's the thing that we've seen that's reoccurring, is that each of these figures at some point is flawed. They make mistakes, but the promise still goes on despite their imperfection, which I believe is a great testimony for us that should encourage us to know that, hey, even though they screwed up and tried to help God out and ultimately paid the price for it, God's plan was still carried out, because ultimately they didn't turn away from God. They didn't abandon God altogether. They just misunderstood or operated in fear at points and helped God out. I say help God out, what they were trying, as if he needed it. But, do we not do the same thing at sometimes? How many times have we known what God has said to us, and we've kind of gotten off in the flesh to kind of help make sure that what God said to us comes to pass? I'm sure every one of us could say that we've done that at some point. So they're no different. They made mistakes, but, God still worked through it, even though he was dealing with flawed human beings. That's what's amazing about God, is that he can give humans free will, and he can still carry out his plan.
The blessing and the birthright and the blessing then wouldn't he have rightfully gotten the blessing? I mean, I don't understand the birthright. What did the birthright do for him?
The birthright was a double inheritance of possessions. And the blessing is a prophetic blessing that is spoken, which they highly revered. That's the difference between the birthright and the blessing. And I mean, you can see clearly that he cared more about the blessing, the prophetic blessing, than he did even the material birthright. So I believe that's a testimony to at least him understanding how powerful the prophetic word was.
I have a couple questions. In verse 29, where it says mother's sons, technically they're both their sons, but Isaac kind of put it on her instead of,
What verse?
I thought I have 29, maybe I put the wrong verse in. I was right, 29.
It's 29.
Right there.
And let thy mother's sons bow down to thee. So,
Sons.
I mean, he's saying it's the mother's sons, but technically it would be both of theirs, not just the mother's, correct?
Yeah, but he's speaking prophetically in this moment over Esau only. So there's no reason for him to include his brother because he's not talking to his brother. He's not talking to Jacob.
Right, but, wouldn't you put our sons instead of just mothers?
Wouldn't it because of the favoritism?
Yeah, would that be, thanks Lydia, would that have been because of the favoritism? That he didn't put our sons, or, cause like I know when Larry and I talk about our kids, we say.
Okay, I follow what you're saying. I think I misunderstood what you were saying at first. Yeah, I mean, I believe he thinks he's blessing Esau. And that's why he says it that way. Yeah, he thinks he's blessing Esau, and so your mother's son would refer to who? Jacob. So he thinks he's blessing Esau over Jacob. But he's actually doing the opposite.
And then in verse, wouldn't Isaac have known about Esau and the suit? How Jacob tricked Esau? Wouldn't he have known that?
I'm sure he would have known about Jacob. He didn't trick him actually in that particular situation. He just took advantage of him in a weak moment when he was tired.
And
You know.
the Lord gave, to me, the Lord gave Isaac many different, like the boys, and goat definitely tastes different than venison.
Venison is not a great translation. Sayid is the Hebrew word which means game, hunting, any kind of game could be presumed there.
And who are the Edomites today?
The Edomites are Edomites throughout the Old Testament are descendants of Esau.
Right, but who would they be today?
They had inhabited east of the Jordan River in what is today modern Jordan. I'm not sure that there's really a definitive way to trace them as a separate or isolated people group. They would have intermarried with people groups of the known ancient Near East area, but they don't exist as a nation per se today. Very few nations of antiquity do. That's what's fascinating about the Jews living in Israel today. The fact that they have come back to that land and become an ethnic group in their land. And there's really no other way to explain that other than God has some plan of future fulfillment for the Jews, which I believe you find evidence of in Paul's statements himself.
And at this point, would there have been city of refuges, like it?
No, there were no cities of refuge until after the Israelites conquest and settle in the land. That's in Joshua,
Right.
where that is initiated. It's said in the Mosaic Law, which is prior to them entering, that there will be 6 cities of refuge, but that's not actually enacted. I mean, it's impossible for it to become a reality until they get to the land.
Right.
So, yeah, the cities of refuge is later on, several hundred years later after this story. Any other questions? Bates? No questions?
They answered, or they asked all the ones that I had written down.
Okay.